It's a really challenging situation where, again, if we stick with the status quo, we're in a situation where things won't naturally get better on their own. And that's why we indicated, like, everyone, it's like the current forecast, the baseline forecast, not including the additional spending that isn't really concrete at this point, but the directions the government has indicated they want to go in, it definitely raises concerns regarding sustainability.
More than $1 billion every single week. That's how much federal debt interest charges are costing you. The federal budget is coming in a matter of weeks, and we've got the guy to cut through the noise and show you exactly what's going on with federal finances. We've got Parliamentary Budget Officer Jason Jakes coming on the show. We've also got Kris Sims. It's going to be Clips with Kris to break down the big taxpayer news stories of the week that you don't want to miss. But first, let's set the table. The federal bureaucracy is out of control. The government added 99,000 extra bureaucrats and ballooned the cost of the bureaucracy 77% since 2016. Now, you might be asking, what are you getting from all of that increase in cost? Well, crappier services, higher taxes, and a bigger government debt bill. Half of Canadians say that federal services have gotten worse over the decade, even with the massive increase in the cost of the federal bureaucracy. And it's not just the number of bureaucrats in Ottawa that's the problem. No. It's also the pay, the perks, the pensions, and the bonuses that you're paying for. The average compensation for a federal government bureaucrat is now more than $125,000 a year. And the federal government is taking your money and rewarding failure with bonuses. The Bank of Canada has one job: keep inflation low and around 2%. Well, inflation reached a 40-year high in 2022, and the Bank of Canada printed up $20 million in bonus checks. Or take the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, who has repeatedly claimed that it's driven by one goal: housing affordability for all. Well, the CMHC handed out $132 million in bonuses since the beginning of 2020. So let that sink in, folks, okay? Canadians can't afford homes, and yet Canada's government housing bureaucrats are showering themselves with bonuses. Or how about Arrive Scam? Yeah, that simple app launched with a price tag of $80,000. The costs ended up spiraling out of control, and taxpayers like you ended up paying $60 million for that ArriveCan app. Well, government executives working on this debacle, working on ArriveCan, took home $340,000 in bonuses. Enough is enough, folks. Ottawa's bureaucratic party with your tax dollars has to come to an end. Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre, he was on CTV, and he was asked about the cost of the federal bureaucracy. Let's watch the full back and forth with Poilievre on CTV about the federal bureaucracy.
He has intimated that there will be some sort of adjustment to the public service. To be fair, during your campaign, you also said there would be cuts, but didn't detail to what degree they would come. How much should the federal government cut the public service, to be exact?
There needs to be billions of dollars of reductions in the federal bureaucracy, and we need to cut the consultants in half. So he should cut the budget for consultants by at least $12 billion.
And what about the budget for public service workers, which right now is at $71.5 billion?
Well, we should reverse the cost of the bureaucracy back at least 5 years to the pre-COVID era. I mean, how is it that we were able to deliver all these services 5 years ago with 40%, 30% less bureaucrats and less bureaucratic spending? We don't need more bureaucracy. We need to leave money in the pockets of entrepreneurs and workers who will generate the real growth for our country.
What do you say to people who hold those jobs, many of whom used to be in your old riding, who will be a factor in the new unemployment rate, who have to look at their families when losing their jobs and figure out a way to support them?
It's very difficult. And of course, right now, the reality is that we're in a liberal jobs crisis. The unemployment rate is skyrocketing. Since Mr. Carney became Prime Minister, 86,000 people have lost their jobs. The answer to that, though, surely cannot be to build the bureaucracy. I mean, if a bigger bureaucracy was going to make for a good job market, then we'd have the best job market in the world, because Liberals have done nothing but spend on bureaucracy and government consultants. What we need is private sector employment. We need businesses to hire more people, giving them paychecks, producing things, goods and services that the country needs. And unfortunately, that's going to be tough. I made the decision to be honest about people to people during the election. Mr. Carney once again pulled a bait and switch.
Well, to be fair, you just said that there'd be cuts. You didn't detail the degree to which you would.
We did actually. I don't have my platform in front of me, but we did have the dollar figures that we plan to save. I think it was
$56 billion
right.
is what your total was, but you didn't break that down.
We did break it down by public service, consultants,
So
foreign aid.
Thousands of Canadians should lose their job in the public service.
Hundreds of thousands of Canadians could gain their jobs, should gain jobs. And that's what we will do when we get rid of the capital gains tax on businesses that reinvest in this country. When we cut taxes on workers, they spend more at local restaurants. When we approve more projects free in the resource sector, all of those welders, pipe fitters, carpenters, though not only employ themselves, but then they go and spend at local hotels and restaurants, creating even more jobs. I'm proposing a boom in job creation. That is what our Conservative plan is, and we encourage the Liberals to adopt it.
And I take your point on all that. And with respect, my question was how many public servants should lose their jobs, not how many private sector jobs should be created.
Well, it's a combination of the two, and you know, we still have some time before the next election when you'll see our platform.
Well, maybe you never know.
You never know.
It's a minority.
I'm better at predicting the past than the future, but I appreciate your impatience. You're asking the right questions, and I can tell you you'll have the right answers before you go voting in the next election. Our job right now as official opposition is to signal the direction, which is we need less money for bureaucracy and more money for taxpayers and job creators.
Yeah, Poilievre is right. Good for him to commit to finding big time savings in the federal bureaucracy. That's exactly what we need. We need cuts to the bloated federal bureaucracy in Ottawa. Think about it this way. Taxpayers would save more than $7 billion every single year if the federal bureaucracy had grown just in line with Canada's population over the decade. Okay, folks, we're going to keep diving into the budget disaster in Ottawa, and we've got the Parliamentary Budget Officer coming on the show next. Folks, I am absolutely giddy with our guest today on the show. Look, I've been following this individual's work for so much time. We've got the interim Parliamentary Budget Officer on the show right now, Mr. Jason Jakes. Mr. Jakes, thanks for coming on the show today. This is awesome.
Oh my gosh, thanks. Thanks so much for the invitation. It's great to be here.
And you know, I know you're a busy man. I've seen you on the parliamentary committee circuit, so let's just get right into it. Now, everyone knows that the Carney government hasn't released a budget as of yet, but in your office, in the Parliamentary Budget Officer, you guys released a economic and fiscal outlook, right? Breaking down the numbers, deficit, debt, interest charges. So can you just lay down the numbers? Let people know where the state of our government finances are right now.
Well, I think as I indicated to committee, and like based upon the conversations I'm having with all parliamentarians right now, the numbers pretty much reflect what everybody's feeling, right? So people across the country are kind of feeling that the economy is not particularly doing really well. It's not particularly strong. That they at home have to make some kind of tough choices right now. And when you look at the federal finances, they look really similar, right? So they look really similar in terms of starting in this year, close to a $70 billion deficit. So something that's like billion with a B, so a really big number. I think for us, like what's kind of more concerning, it's something that we've been flagging to parliamentarians is, in the past, we've seen a situation where there's short-term challenges, but over the longer term, like years 3, 4, and 5, a lot of resiliency in the Canadian economy and things are going to get better. And now we don't necessarily see that. So in particular, looking at one of the metrics that we look at and the government looks at, pays a lot of attention to, the debt to GDP ratio. So the amount of debt the federal government has as a size of the overall economy, we see that going up over the next 5 years. And that's something we haven't seen in a very, very long time. But I think overall, the bottom line is it's a really challenging fiscal situation for the government and for Ottawa. And there are going to be some tough choices and tough decisions that they're going to need to make over the next 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah, you mentioned a deficit of almost $70 billion. You mentioned the debt to GDP ratio. Very startling. Another number I'll point out is just interest charges on the debt, right? In your report, we're looking at $55 billion on interest charges, right? That's more than $1 billion a week, folks. I did some quick math. That means interest charges are costing each Canadian about $1,300 this year alone. And Mr. Jakes, like, as startling as these numbers are, right? Your projection also doesn't include what billions of dollars in additional spending that was included in the Liberal Party's election platform, but that hasn't been announced yet, right? Like, isn't that the case?
Yeah, that's correct. I'd say there have been some, I think, legitimate criticisms of our forecast that there are major areas of spending where the government has flagged that they want to go into, or major policy areas where we simply don't have enough detail at this point to actually figure out exactly what the figures look like. So you had mentioned defense spending. So further increasing defense spending, we didn't incorporate that commitment of the NATO 2% rising to the 5%. So the additional getting up to the 5% target, as well as about $20 billion per year in additional spending that was flagged in the Liberal platform. On the offset side, there is an expenditure review that's currently underway in the Liberal platform that was supposed to generate about $15 billion worth of savings. But certainly on net, there are a lot of spending pressures out there based upon what the direction the government's indicated they want to go in, that we did not explicitly include within our numbers.
Yeah, no, and I think your analysis is super fair, right? Because you haven't seen what has happened yet. We kind of have to wait and see. I would just kind of bring that up as like, this might be a baseline, right? Like the $70 billion deficit, borrowing $60 billion in the future, like it can get worse than that. And that's really concerning me. And Mr. Jakes, like, you know, I'm a big econ nerd. I love going through government finances, but I think most people watching this are just, you know, normal people working 40 hours a week, taking care of their kids or their grandkids. Can you explain, like, how concerning should people be here? You've used the word challenging already today. I've seen in committee you mentioned unsustainable. Like, what does this mean for normal Canadians, for normal taxpayers, and how concerned should people be?
Yeah, I think in terms of, I think everyone across the country should be concerned, right? Because the numbers we're looking at, like I've been with the Parliamentary Budget Office for the past 17 years. Before that, I spent like over 10 years putting together budgets in the Department of Finance and the Bank of Canada and the Treasury Board. And it's a really challenging situation where, again, if we stick with the status quo, we're in a situation where things won't naturally get better on their own. And that's why we indicated, like, everyone, it's like the current forecast, the baseline forecast, not including the additional spending that isn't really concrete at this point, but the directions the government has indicated they want to go in, it definitely raises concerns regarding sustainability. And I think like for a lot of folks, like they know, like you manage a household budget, you have to make decisions, and you know that, okay, 1 year to the next or 1 month to the next, you might have an unexpected expense. You might have to borrow a bit of money, take down some of your money, cash out of savings, borrow some money from a friend or a neighbor, something from a line of credit. And you expect that, okay, well, I'll be able to pay it back, right? So I'll be able to save a little bit more, like scrimp a little bit on vacation or so, what have you. So you'll end up in a better situation where the money's paid back and you're definitely operating in a sustainable way. And so for us, looking at the baseline it's before the government tables the budget on November 4th, the current baseline we're on definitely raises concerns regarding sustainability. And on our end, we certainly anticipate that the government is going to be making announcements leading up to the budget, and certainly as part of the budget, that are going to address that.
I want to shift gears ever so slightly. And I want to talk about the federal bureaucracy. And I know the PBO have done a ton of reports on the cost of bureaucracy over the years. And one PBO report that I looked at, it said the cost of the bureaucracy was like $40 billion in 2016. The most recent report pegs the cost of the bureaucracy for last year at around $71 billion, right? So, like, just quick math, that's a 77% increase in the cost of the federal bureaucracy in a decade, right? That's an enormous increase in the cost of the federal bureaucracy. I've also heard the Prime Minister say that he's going to try to address the bureaucracy through attrition, right? Essentially letting people retire, not backfill. But, like, is attrition enough to either balance the budget? Is attrition enough to balance the budget?
It's a good question. We haven't conducted recent analysis in this specific area with respect to attrition. I would say it would be highly challenging, like very challenging, to be able to balance the budget on the basis of attrition. Another point that we've made in the past is like waiting until somebody retires or voluntarily like leaves the bureaucracy to choose a job elsewhere. Potentially, it's not the best way of actually managing things. Just thinking in terms of like the federal government. The federal government is big, right? Like there are over 360,000 federal public servants. Some of them, and I think many of them, operate in really critical areas, right? Like so, RCMP, the Canadian Forces, border security and border safety, the Coast Guard, food inspectors, and if we let those people, if the government was to decide that they're going to let some of those people go through attrition, then it does pose additional challenges. You might save the money, and at the same time, it poses the challenge of, okay, well, what happens with border security, or what happens with food safety? All that said, the government, I would note that the government has been kind of going back and forth on that. So they use the word attrition. Then somebody over the course, I think it was in late August, there were members of cabinet using the word cuts. And then now they've gone back to attrition. So I do think, like many things around town in Ottawa these days, it's kind of everything, it's in flux.
Okay, so I want to shift gears one more time here, and I want to talk about the budget. And we've heard a lot from the Prime Minister as one of his campaign promises that he's going to split the budget. And essentially, he's going to detail operating spending and capital spending. And I read your analysis on it. I also read the federal government's criteria of what would be capital spending. And two things stuck out to me. So on the federal government's criteria of capital spending, what most people think of roads, paying for roads, ports, things of that nature, I notice operating subsidies to businesses, or what at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, what we call corporate welfare, I noticed that would be included in capital expenditures. And the second thing that stood out to me was from your report that the government's definition of capital, quote, overly expansive and exceeds international practice. And I'm just wondering if you can explain what that means and why that would matter for Canadian taxpayers.
Yeah, I think with respect to the overly broad definition, the concern around capital, the concern or the consideration, one of the ones that we flagged was the point that you made around areas where you're including things that traditionally people wouldn't think of as being a capital investment. So something you're probably familiar with, like, I don't know, like every Canadian province, a lot of the big municipalities of the cities, they all have operating capital budgets. And what you typically see in a capital budget is what you would expect, right? Like you got bridges and you got roads and you got buildings and so what have you. And by including other things which are kind of non-intuitive, so an operating subsidy to a facility or to a company that might result in capital being built, or some sort of additional capital investment, it potentially muddies the water in terms of what you're actually trying to convey to parliamentarians and the broader public. And especially, something you're aware of, like the budget is really big, right? It's like 500, 600 pages. There's a lot of stuff in there. And for somebody, like in the case of parliamentarians, they got to make decisions really quickly around the budget and whether they're going to support it or not. So including a new definition around operating and capital, and especially having an overly broad capital definition, potentially results in a situation where parliamentarians will have a more challenging time actually understanding precisely what they're voting on.
Thank you for that. Okay, one last question. I'm just wondering, right? Like, I feel like a lot of people, they grow up, they're like, I want to be a hockey player, I want to be a fireman or something like that. But, I'm at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation looking at government numbers. You're at the Parliamentary Budget Officer, the government's own independent, nonpartisan budget watchdog. Why did you get into this career where you're like, I want to look at government finances, government debt, government spending?
I think in many ways is like the motivation. And again, like I've been here for the majority of my career. And the motivation for it is really like it's the mandate of the office, which is transparency. So the transparency around like all the money from the federal government, like it's the federal government every year has to go out across the country and get people to pay taxes that come to Ottawa and that they put in a big pot, not in the House of Commons, but I guess now it's a digital bank account. So they collect all the money, and parliamentarians need to make decisions on that, right? They need to decide how much tax, who's going to pay the tax, and what is going to be taxed. And ensuring that parliamentarians are aware of what's going on and have a good sense of that. I think it's, for myself, it's a good calling. And then the flip side in terms of spending, again, like I think you've seen what goes on Parliament Hill. There are a lot of decisions being made really quickly around spending allocations. And if on the margin, we can help parliamentarians be a little bit further ahead. So when they're making those decisions, they're in a better place and a little bit more informed, and they feel more confident around both making the decision and occasionally asking harder questions around the spending. For my part, I find it really rewarding. Even though I might come to the office with a cold and I might not feel particularly great and I might feel tired, I'm going to tell you, like, going and meeting with parliamentarians before they go in for a vote on something, and they ask the question, well, how much is this going to cost? How many people? Can they actually process it effectively? How much is it going to cost internally to the government in terms of administrative costs to actually manage this? The fact that I can support them and then they go into the House of Commons and they vote on it, I think it's great. I find it really satisfying.
Well, Mr. Jakes, I just want to say, first, thank you so much to you and your team. We've really been following your guys' work for a very long time, whether it's on carbon taxes, whether it's on budget analysis like we're talking about today, or just on individual tax analysis. Like, your guys' work is awesome, and I'm really, like, I'm pumped that you were on the show today to talk to myself and our audience. So I just want to say thanks for coming on the show.
Oh my gosh, yeah, no, it's our pleasure, and I appreciate you taking the time to read through the reports. Glad you find them useful, and hopefully we have an opportunity to sit down virtually again, if not in person.
Oh, that'd be great. I look forward to it. Well, there you go, folks. We just had the interim Parliamentary Budget Officer on the show to break down what's going on with Ottawa and your money. But stay tuned, folks, because coming up next, we got Kris Sims. It's Clips with Kris to go over the big taxpayer news stories of the week you don't want to miss. All right, we've got Kris Sims on the show. My favorite segment of the week, it's Clips with Kris. Oh, Sim, are you ready for this? We're going to have a little bit of fun.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm actually in Ottawa right now, so I can hear you kind of in the other room. So this is a trip. This is fun.
Yeah, we got Simmer in Mordor. Don't worry, folks.
Yeah.
We'll ship her back to God's country soon enough. Kris, let's get into it. We got a bunch of big taxpayer news stories of the week that I want to touch on. The first one comes from Blacklock's Reporter, an invaluable online investigative news source. And I'm just going to read you their headline. PM's friend awarded $679,000. Okay, folks, so let me just give you a little bit of a background here. So Carney created a new bureaucracy, okay? The name of the bureaucracy is the Defense Investment Agency. The bureaucrat tapped to head up that agency is going to be paid a salary of $680,000 a year. Okay, $680,000 a year. Now, to put that into perspective, this top bureaucrat is paid way more than other overpaid federal bureaucrats and politicians. Okay, the prime minister's salary just shy of $420,000. The finance minister's salary just shy of $310,000. A backbench member of parliament, their salary just shy of $210,000. Even the governor general's salary of $378,000 is way less than this new top bureaucrat of the Defense Investment Agency, whose salary will be just shy of $680,000. Simmer, take it away.
This is even more money, Franco, than is being paid to the CBC CEO.
Mm-hmm.
Like, now you know you're into the big bucks. And I think what a lot of people are asking themselves is, why? Why are we paying for this? Because are we seeing outstanding results? Now, I'll wait maybe like a year, maybe 2 years. But what we've experienced so far, Franco, is that we'll hand out big bonuses to places like CMHC for really terrible service because homes aren't more affordable. We'll hand out big bucks and big bonuses to the Bank of Canada, even though they can't seem to keep the inflation rate down. Like, this is where I'm not going to hold my breath. Are we all of a sudden going to see really top-notch defense procurement? Like, we're going to get really cool ships built for a really low price? I seriously doubt it, but good gig if you can get it. $600,000. You could get 3 backbenchers for that, plus a little extra for gas money, right?
Yeah, well, I like the extra for gas money. Not sure if we need more backbenchers, right? I'm not sure if we need that. Look, let me just add this because the numbers are so glaring, right? Like this top bureaucrat's salary is like $680,000, and that's a taxpayer-funded salary, folks. So you really don't need to add too much color. Like it's just sickening. Just thinking about that there. But let me just add on this note, Kris. You know the word public servant,
Oh yeah, that's my
right?
favorite.
Public servant. Well, like you're not really a public servant if you're taking $680,000 from taxpayers a year. And it's when I see these kind of reports that I really have to ask myself, who's really serving who here? Because it
Yeah.
sure feels like it's us taxpayers who are working very hard to pay for their income. So who's really serving who?
As you like to say, it's the makers versus the takers, right? And we've now got this bureaucrat class, which has become the upper class because they wind up with jobs for life quite often, and they wind up with salaries that are way over and above what the average person makes. Now, the term public servant, okay, that was started decades ago. And what it's supposed to conjure up is probably like some British middle manager in like a very humble brown tweed suit, making a middle of the road salary. He doesn't make that much, but he really likes helping people, and it's a secure job in his little office cubicle, and he writes up his reports all day and he does his work. That's not the world we're living in anymore, Franco. As you guys went through during the Peace Act protests and stuff and the big strike pay that was handed out, like you wind up getting big fat cat salaries handed to these government employees, as I prefer to call them. But isn't it funny? The moment they're trying to say and defend their salaries, they're automatically a public servant again. I don't think that washes anymore, man.
Okay, let's just touch this really quickly and then move on because I do want to talk about the Fraser Institute's report, okay, the Great Employee Divide in Canada. So the Fraser Institute looks at like similar positions in the private sector versus government bureaucrats. They control for a whole bunch of economic factors like age, education, industry, occupation, a whole bunch of stuff. So it's like as apples to apples of a comparison that you can do. And the Fraser Institute found that if you look at government bureaucrats versus workers outside of government, well, government bureaucrats, apples to apples, their salary is 5% higher than those in the private sector. Not just that, not just 5% wage premium for government bureaucrats, much more likely to get a pension, much more likely to get the platinum defined benefit pension. Not only that, but government bureaucrats also retire earlier, have more job security, and take more days off than our friends in the private sector.
I'll just add on to that freelancing because of my own experience working here in Mordor, also known as Ottawa. Quite often, those bureaucrats, they get big severance checks too. Once they finally leave, I don't know if it's banked sick time or whatever it is, but I saw this happen with my own eyeballs. Quite often when they retire, they walk away with tens of thousands of extra dollars that normal private sector people don't see. And this is routine. This is not just some bigwig getting this. This is routine to the point where the old joke around Ottawa here, Franco, was that when a bureaucrat retires and they're relatively senior, they usually called that their boat bonus or their cottage bonus because that's what they went and spent it on.
Okay, let's move on. Okay, so I'm going to read you another headline. This is another great one from Blacklocks. Finds Senate life a burden.
I know. That's rough. That's really rough. So we've got this senator. I forget how much he's making, but he's clocking
$184,000. $184,000 a year, folks.
And the burden is the flying back and forth, right? Going from Western Canada into Ottawa and back and forth again. This is the thing. He can quit. Like he can quit. This is not a sentence, okay? It's not as if he's been called before committee with a subpoena and he has to stay in that same chair all year. He's not allowed to leave or the bailiffs are going to get him when he walks out. No, he can go. He can leave out the door. He can resign his Senate seat. This is the thing is, again, you get into this terrible sense of entitlement that a lot of these folks have. And again, I have to stress this on Parliament Hill, these salaries that Franco's talking about, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Like all of their expenses are paid, man. Quite often, a lot of these politicians in Ottawa, They'll charge for meals, they'll charge per diems, like their bills are covered, like their taxis are covered. It's not how the rest of us live. And frankly, if this senator does not like living here in Ottawa and flying back and forth, he should just quit and go find another job. Frankly, why don't we have an elected Senate? Where'd that go? What happened to Preston's dream of having an elected and effective Senate?
Yeah, I'm not even sure why we need a Senate, to be honest with you.
You know,
Like, I'm not even sure. Like, just hey guys, I'm just spitballing here. Like, honest, I don't know. I don't know where. Yeah, like, come on. You know, it's kind of funny, right? But we ask our supporters, like, we do these surveys. You and I were actually chatting about the summer survey that we did, and it's a lot of our CTF supporters saying exactly what I just said there. But you know, at the end of the day, right? Like, you do see a crazy increase in expenses at the Senate, including their bureaucracy costs. Like, we talk about the cost of the bureaucracy going up. We talked a lot about that in this Franco Terrazzano show, but that's also taking place at the Senate. Now, Kris, you mentioned my favorite phrase: the makers versus the takers, the taxpayers versus the tax consumers. And speaking of the takers, the CBC. Kris, you broke some news this week on social media with the CBC taking some extra cash from taxpayers. Why don't you just tell us what's going on there?
yeah, this one, there's certain things that really get me on principle, and this is the biggest one. Journalists should not be paid by the government. Straight up, I don't care if you consider yourself a left-wing journalist, right-wing journalist, down-the-middle journalist, robot journalist. We don't care. You should not be taking money from the government, because that is the opposite of a free press. A free press is free from government interference, influence, and funding. But the CBC is a complete walking, talking conflict of interest. They are the opposite of a free press. They are government-funded media. So that everything they say and do, you always have to keep thinking, this is Pravda. This is government-funded media. I don't know what to think anymore, because they're on the payroll. And it's highlighted even more. I'll point out this conflict of interest even more, because I was going back through their quarterly fiscal updates for fun, right? And so I was looking at where they were getting their money from. And they highlighted the fact that in the 3 months leading up to June 30th, they collected more than $13 million more from government. So every year, right now, this year, they're getting around $1.4 billion. But on top of that, their funding from government increased by more than $13 million during the same time frame of the federal government's election. Now, that kind of money goes up and down over the course of different quarters and different years. My point is that exactly the same time as the calendar year of the election, right, in that part in the year, they also got more money from the government. This is a conflict of interest. It's always a conflict of interest with the CBC, but more so during an election, because I'll give you this mental image, okay? Say during the last election, there's a reporter from the CBC standing there on Spark Street, interviewing the two candidates who want to be prime minister. Candidate A: I will give your employer more money if I'm prime minister. Candidate B: I will completely defund your employer if I become prime minister. How is that media employee supposed to call that story straight? They can't. It's a conflict of interest. So yeah, I couldn't help but notice that they actually got an extra $13 million that happened to fall in the same quarter as the federal election. This is why we need to defund the CBC.
We're going to end it right there. Defund the CBC. Ladies and gentlemen, Kris Sims. It was Clips with Kris Simmer. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Franco.
Folks, wasn't that a fun show? Like, I don't know about you. Like, I'm just going to go on a little tangent, but I was so happy just interviewing the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Like, I'm kind of a nerd, guys, if you haven't figured that out. And it was just great kind of dissecting what's going on with the shenanigans in Ottawa's budgeting and the crazy spending, the crazy debt. More than $1 billion a week. Debt interest charges, right? Interest charges costing each Canadian $1,300 this year, right? And that's not even paying down the debt. That's just $1,300 the government is taking from each Canadian to make interest payments on the debt. Absolutely gross. Okay, folks, thanks for watching along. Let us know in the comments below, like, are you guys liking this format? This is, we're about a month into this new format. Let me know if you like it. Let me know what else you guys would want to hear about or listen to. Leave it in the comments below. I'm going to read them, so be nice. And with that, folks, I'm Franco Terrazzano. I'm going to keep fighting back against those entitled politicians and bureaucrats. We hope you keep fighting with us. Until next time.